The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus. On a day when Hamas announced that it had accepted a ceasefire proposal brought forth by Egypt and Qatar, Israel declared that it was going ahead with its offensive in Rafah and signaling the beginning of what is currently being described as a limited operation. Israeli tanks rolled into the southern Gaza city late on Tuesday. Remember, there has been tremendous international pressure on Israel not to press ahead with the military operation in Rafah, where over half the Gazan population has been sheltering for months now. Even US President Joe Biden, Israel's strongest ally, has repeatedly conveyed to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Tel Aviv must not pursue this path as it is likely to lead to much further devastation in the embattled enclave. Netanyahu has always maintained that Israel would only be driven by its national security interests and not by any external pressure. And now a very important piece of information has been reported by the Western media. A senior US administration official has been quoted as saying that last week the United States paused a bomb shipment for Israel over concerns that the latter was going ahead with a major ground operation in Rafah. The shipment consisted of 1,800 bombs weighing 907 kilos and another 1,700 bombs weighing 225 kilos each. The official said Israel has not fully addressed US concerns over humanitarian needs of civilians in Rafah. Predictably, Israeli military officials have tried to play down the US move. Israel Defense Forces spokesperson Daniel Hagari told a news conference that the US had provided unprecedented security assistance since the beginning of the war, adding that disputes between the allies were resolved behind closed doors in a matter-of-fact way. He also added, "We are responsible for the security interests of the State of Israel and we are attentive to the interests of the United States in the region." Now, this report emerges even as overnight there were further Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, hours after Israeli forces backed by tanks took control of the Palestinian side of the key Rafah crossing on the border with Egypt. The Israeli bombardment was particularly intense around Rafah. Local medics said 7 members of one family were killed in a single strike. Rafah has been a key entry point for aid and the only exit for people who are able to flee since the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas last October. The crossing remains closed as of now, but the Israeli military has said it is reopening the nearby Kerem Shalom crossing, which had been closed for 4 days because of Hamas rocket fire. On Monday, the Israeli military ordered tens of thousands of civilians to begin evacuating nearby eastern parts of Rafah city ahead of what it called a limited operation to eliminate Hamas fighters and dismantle infrastructure. Efforts still continue to reach a ceasefire alongside the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. In Cairo, delegations from Israel and Hamas have resumed negotiations through mediators. The senior US administration official who has been quoted, though not named, by the Western media has reportedly also said, and I quote, "The US position has been that Israel should not launch a major ground operation in Rafah, where more than 1 million people are sheltering with nowhere else to go. We've been engaging in a dialogue with Israel in our strategic consultative group format on how they will meet the humanitarian needs of civilians in Rafah and how to operate differently against Hamas there than they have elsewhere in Gaza. Those discussions are ongoing and have not fully addressed our concerns, as Israeli leaders seem to approach a decision point on such an operation. We began to carefully review proposed transfers of particular weapons to Israel that might be used in Rafah. This began in April. As a result of that review, we have paused one shipment of weapons last week. It consists of 1,800 2,000 lb bombs and 1,700 500 lb bombs. We are especially focused on the end use of the 2,000 lb bombs and the impact they could have in dense urban settings, as we have seen in other parts of Gaza. We've not made a final determination on how to proceed with this shipment. The official also stated, for certain other cases at the State Department, including Joint Direct Attack Munition Kits, we are continuing the review. None of these cases involve imminent transfers. This is about future transfers. The official stressed that the shipments were unrelated to last month's $17 billion military aid package, but had been drawn from previously appropriated funds. The larger 2,000 lb bombs are most likely to be Mk-84s or possibly BLU 109s or both. The former is a cheap general-purpose munition and the latter a penetration bomb designed for use against hardened or underground targets. Both can be fitted with Joint Direct Attack Munition Kits that deliver precision capability using satellite navigation. Laser guidance kits can also be fitted. These bombs can be made to be very accurate down to just a few meters. But in a dense urban environment like Gaza, the risk of so-called collateral damage is very high, and that is where the concern lies. The smaller 500 lb bombs can also be fitted with guidance units dropped from jets. Such weapons are likely to be used not just in Gaza but also against targets in southern Lebanon, belonging to the Iran-backed group Hezbollah, which has been involved in almost daily cross-border exchanges of fire with Israeli forces since the beginning of the Gaza war. The weapons being held back by the US are related to a future delivery, so it's unlikely to have any immediate impact. But given the rate at which Israel is bombing, it will likely affect future strikes fairly soon. Reports say this is a clear message from Washington, which is growing increasingly concerned about Israel's campaign in Gaza. Almost 35,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, according to the territory's Hamas-run health ministry. Let's now also take a quick look at the significance of Rafah and why Israel has moved into the city. Israel Defense Forces sent tanks into the city in southern Gaza on Tuesday, as it said that the terms of the ceasefire deal were still undecided. Israel has claimed that the Palestinian side of the Rafah border is being used for terrorist activities. Any border control is an important strategic objective, and the seizure of this one allows Israel to control the key entry and exit point with Egypt. Israeli military officials have not put a timeline on their operation in Rafah, but may not want to relinquish the site soon. A presence there brings Israel closer to cutting off any Hamas leaders in Rafah and allows control of aid convoys as well as other traffic. The crossing has been a lifeline to the outside world for Palestinians in Gaza, allowing the delivery of aid and the evacuation of patients from a collapsed healthcare system. Closing it is a death sentence against the people of Gaza, particularly the ill and injured, says the Palestinian-run Gaza Crossings Authority. The only other crossing point in the south, Kerem Shalom, through which most aid to Gaza has been delivered recently, had been closed after a Hamas rocket fire, but has now been reopened.
Last night, with the approval of the War Cabinet, I ordered an operation in Rafah. Within hours, our forces raised the Israeli flags at the Rafah crossing and removed the Hamas's flags. The mission in Rafah serves two primary objectives: securing the return of our abductees and eliminating Hamas. We've previously demonstrated that military pressure on Hamas is crucial for hostage release. The Hamas proposal yesterday aimed to prevent our forces entry into Rafah, but it failed. The War Cabinet unanimously deemed the Hamas's proposal far from Israel's necessary requirements. Israel will not permit Hamas to reinstate its rule in Gaza or rebuild its military capabilities aimed at...
All right. Time for us to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere because we will discuss the import of all these big developments with our panel of experts in just a moment.
India produces between 1,500 and 2,000 films every year, the highest for any country, but they get ignored at international awards.
The Oscars are basically American national awards for themselves. You're not going to be able to make a better pizza than an Italian chef. You're not going to be able to make better sushi than a Japanese chef. Will you make better khichdi than a Japanese chef? Right? So I want you to taste my food. We are making cinema that we are proud of.
In fact, it has been 2 decades since an Indian feature film featured in the Oscars International Film category.
All these years, for much of its history, they've been just awarding their own films, and this one tiny category, Best Foreign Language Film, had the entire world frothing at the mouth to get into the Oscars.
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing what Israel's next move in Rafah is likely to be, what it could mean for the ongoing war, and also this very interesting and important report that has emerged in the American and other Western media in the last 24 hours suggesting that the US actually halted a shipment of bombs for Israel just last week. Let's discuss this with our guests. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, Lev Aaron, Israeli columnist and journalist, Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, former Indian diplomat, Major General Sanjay Meston, defense and geopolitical expert, and in a moment we're also hoping to be joined by Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat as well. A warm welcome to all my guests. Lev, welcome back to Global Lens. Let me begin with you. Now, there are a few important developments that have taken place. Just yesterday, Hamas first said that it had accepted the ceasefire proposal put forth by Egypt and Qatar. All that Israel has said so far is that it far from meets its demands, yet a delegation has been sent to Cairo for further negotiations. At the same time, we saw tanks rolling into Rafah, the southern city in Gaza, which Israel has been threatening to launch a full-fledged ground operation in, something that the entire international community, including the United States, has been warning Israel against. And then comes this report in the Western media, which says that the United States, Israel's closest and staunchest ally, paused a massive shipment of bombs for Israel over concerns over what Israel might do next in Rafah. What do you make of all these developments, and what are you picking up from your own sources in Tel Aviv and elsewhere? Just what is the thinking in the Israeli establishment right now?
Okay, so I think that after the Iranian attack on Israel, Israel is more obedient to America than before. Mm-hmm. And everything that Israel did right now in Rafah was with some kind of okay from the Americans. And we see that you don't really see an occupation of Rafah. You see that now Rafah is under siege from Israel, and the GAZA Egyptian border is under Israeli control, but you don't see actually Israeli soldiers in the Rafah Kasbahs inside. So I think there is some kind of American and Israeli understanding what Israel can do and what Israel cannot do. And another thing is also that there is some kind of, let's say, of a double talk in the Middle East, because on one hand, let's take Rania, Queen of Jordan. She slams Israel time and again, but Jordanians want Israel to win Hamas. So on one hand, there is a talk against Israel. On the other hand, I think most of the pro-American Sunni countries want Israel to win. And I'm not sure that most of the American ammunition goes to Gaza. I think part of it is also against Iran, against Hezbollah, and not for the small fight of Rafah and Israel, as far as I'm concerned and I understand.
since you're going to leave shortly, Lev, I want to ask you another question. That, while we are still waiting to see what happens in Rafah next, Israel is describing it as a limited operation. You're saying that it is double speak on part of many countries like the United States. But really, isn't this a major revelation that the US last week decided to halt a weapon shipment to Israel because Washington believes that Tel Aviv has not adequately addressed its concerns. As far as Rafah is concerned, we know President Biden is on record as saying we do not want Israel to go ahead with a ground operation in Rafah where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering. Do you not believe this is a very important development? Because at the end of the day, Israel needs US assistance to carry on with this war.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think also it has a big impact on domestic politics if Americans leave us. Americans have three tools with Israel. One is money, one is second is weapon, and third is their special status in the United Nations. So, of course, each and every development that shows that Americans are very unhappy with Israel, it gives more strength to the, more solid and pro-Western elements inside the Israeli war cabinet. So I agree with you that once the Americans are unhappy with Israel, also inside the war cabinet, there is less appetite to do something that the Americans will punish Israel later on. But if we look at the big picture, I still think that Americans want Israel to win the war. They want the hostages back. They understand that the Hamas offer is not the offer that they expect Hamas to have, because there was a different offer. And also they understand that for Israel to survive in such a neighborhood, they need to win Hamas. They cannot lose this war, because then the impact also on Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Jordan and Egypt and the other countries, it can be, it will be very negative. So there is a double talk. And on the other hand, the Americans are sure that there are like fringe right-wing elements inside the Israeli government that give bad advices to Bibi. And Americans want to show Bibi that they can punish him in a much harsher way than any fringe far right-wing party that is inside the cabinet.
Okay, very interesting, because the same fringe far-right elements that you are talking about are the ones who are, one, propping up Netanyahu's government, and two, these are the very elements that actually do not want to see an end to the war. These are the elements that continue to reject every ceasefire deal that's ever placed on the table. So the question is, you agree, and therefore the question really is, will Netanyahu, listen to these elements, continue to pander to these elements for his own political survival and continue with the war? But there is also this risk of further incurring the wrath of the very angry families of the Israeli hostages, Lev, very quickly.
Yes, but there is a gray area. It is not a war or a peace. It is more like which kind of a war. So the fringe anti-American far-right parties, yes, they want some kind of a full war that the Americans will not allow us, and also most of the Israeli public doesn't want. On the other hand, you're right. Netanyahu is banking on their votes, and you know better than me that horse trading in politics is everywhere. So it is a very complicated situation as far as domestic politics is concerned.
It's a very, very complex situation as far as domestic politics is concerned, and also a very complicated situation as far as the ground situation in Gaza is concerned. Thanks so much, Lev, for your comments. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat, also joins us on Global Lens at this point. Ma'am, a warm welcome to you. I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue this conversation on the other side.
Currently, the industry is facing a lot of challenges as far as demand is concerned. Basically, the US markets has slowed down because of high inflation.
So obviously, diamonds being a dream product, something which doesn't have a utility value or is seen as a luxury. So that obviously goes off your shopping list. That's the first item that will go off your shopping list, especially in recessionary trends.
That lab-grown diamonds are not mined, and they do away with the entire mining. So they save up on all the environmental damage that is associated with mining, and of course, the mining cost, which is why they're even more affordable.
People that is impacted by all these recessions are the artisans, are the people who work in this industry, right? But I think lab-grown diamond has allowed them to actually use their skills in the same product.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now go across to Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, there have been some very important developments in the last 24 hours or thereabouts. Negotiations are still underway in Cairo as we speak, with Hamas declaring yesterday that it has accepted the ceasefire proposal that was put forth by Egypt and Qatar. We'll have to wait and see what Israel's view on it finally is. At the same time, we saw tanks rolling into Rafah, the southern city in Gaza. And then comes a report in the Western media saying that just last week, the United States, Israel's staunchest ally, paused shipment of bombs for Israel over its concerns about what Israel might do in Rafah. And the unnamed senior US administration official who's been quoted by the Western media reportedly said the US position has been that Israel should not launch a major ground operation in Rafah, where more than 1 million people are sheltering with nowhere else to go. We began to carefully review our proposed transfers of weapons, particular weapons, to Israel that might be used in Rafah. And this began in April. As a result of that review, we have paused one major shipment of weapons last week, consisting of 1,800 2,000 lb bombs and 1,700 500 lb bombs. We are focused on the end use and the impact these could have in dense settings, such as the one in Gaza. How do you read these developments, ma'am?
Well, these developments certainly indicate increased American pressure on the Israeli government. But unfortunately, the tanks rolling in means that the last refuge of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is under threat, which could, unless it stops, result in a whole-scale massacre of civilians, including Palestinian women and children. And how much leverage the Americans have to actually stop such a development is not very clear, given the fact that the current Prime Minister of Israel appears to be completely under the control of extreme right-wing elements in his cabinet who want to completely destroy Hamas, and they don't seem to understand that Hamas is a movement as well as consisting of people. So it's until you destroy the reasons for which Hamas came into existence, it is not so easy to destroy Hamas, but it is easier to destroy the entire Gaza Strip and to kill all Palestinian women and children in the process. But you may still not kill Hamas. So unless this realization dawns on the right-wing elements in the Israeli cabinet, you could be looking at a full humanitarian crisis, not just of mass starvation of civilians, but mass slaughter. And I think you rightly pointed out a little while ago to our Israeli guests that the hostage families in Israel want a ceasefire to get back the hostages or their dead bodies. And such a deal till day before yesterday appeared to be in the making. But it was turned down by Israel, who said that they will not stop until they completely destroy Hamas. So we are back to where we started. So I am not sure whether stopping one shipment is going to stop the Israeli government because he is under the control of right-wing elements. If he agrees to a ceasefire, the entire wartime cabinet may form. That, looking at it in retrospect, could be a good thing because maybe elections in Israel would bring in a more reasonable government and a better way to find a ceasefire, get the hostages released, and to then establish some kind of governance in the Gaza Strip so that the civilian population that has been completely displaced can return, some order can be brought, some food aid can be sent, etc. So it would appear to me, Neha, that at the present moment, the present Israeli Prime Minister, under the control of extreme right-wing anti-American elements, I don't think is going to bow to this pressure until the situation becomes much worse. I fear, Neha, the situation is going to become much worse, and it is giving rise to anti-Semitic sentiments in the West, which is the biggest supporter of Israel apart from India.
Yes.
And I'm surprised that the Israeli government does not understand how serious it is if there is anti-Semitic sentiment all over the West. It's not good for Israel at all. So
It's
I don't
not
know
good
why
for
that
Israel.
realization has not dawned on them.
You're quite right, Ambassador. I couldn't agree more with you. And, it's interesting you talk about how Israel needs fresh elections, which could bring in a more moderate and a saner government. But those are the very elections that Netanyahu is desperately trying to put off for as long as he possibly can, because he knows the writing is on the wall. He's more unpopular than ever before. You ask any sensible person in Israel today, and they will tell you, if an election is held today in that country, Netanyahu will be sent packing by the people of Israel. But how much longer can he put this off? We're going to look at a lot of these critical questions, but after this very short break.
It's been 3 years of the deadly Delta variant of COVID-19. India saw over 1.2 lakh deaths in May 2021. Overall, more than 5.3 lakh people died in India due to COVID-19 pandemic. The global death toll is over 70 lakhs. There are new variants on the scene now, and the World Health Organization has classified them as variants of interest that should be monitored closely. What are these new variants and how worried should we be? News 9 Plus decodes. 2 new variants are spreading fast in the US, KP1.1 and KP2. They belong to Omicron's JN.1 lineage. Together, they're referred to with the nickname FLIRT or FLIRT. Why is the variant group called FLIRT? The nickname is based on the technical names for their mutations. What are the symptoms of the new variants? Experts say the symptoms are similar to those associated with the previous Omicron subvariants. So watch out for flu-like symptoms: sore throat, runny nose, cough, nasal congestions, fever, and body ache. There may also be digestive issues or loss of smell and taste. How many cases have been attributed to the new variants? According to the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention, about 32% of the recent infections in the US are due to the 2 new variants. In March 2024, the KP2 variant caused about 3.9% of cases. This surged to 25% in April. Reports say that the new variants have also been found in the UK and New Zealand. Are the new variants a cause for concern? Experts believe that these new variants are more infectious than the previous Omicron variants. They can evade the vaccine and bypass immunity. The summer break in the US could cause this virus to spread further domestically, as well as reach other parts of the world. With global travel back on track, the risk for India remains. Testing and precautions have taken a backseat. India's high population density and varying levels of immunity could also be potential risk factors. After all, vaccines don't provide permanent immunity, and even natural immunity will wane after a while. The WHO has advised that new variants should be monitored closely, but there is no need to panic as yet. How can you stay safe from the new variants? According to the expert, hand hygiene, vaccination, using masks and getting tested are the biggest preventive measures.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's go across to our other guest now, Major General Sanjay Meston. Let me start with you, sir. What do you make of what's happening on the ground? It's not a full-fledged ground operation yet, but tanks have rolled into Rafah. Israel is describing it as a limited operation. The US has already stopped one shipment of weapons to Israel, as per this report that has emerged today in the Western media, quoting US officials. Now, it is no secret that President Biden is increasingly uncomfortable with Israel's war, especially its approach towards Rafah. How do you think this is likely to pan out over the next few days? Because on the one hand, Netanyahu keeps claiming that Israel alone will decide what it needs to do in its own best interest and will not be driven by any external pressure. But on the other hand, it's also very clear that President Biden has a lot to worry about on the eve of a difficult election against Donald Trump.
Neha, good evening. Thanks once again for calling us. Let me highlight that the situation now is extremely critical, and this phase I would term it as a phase where it is pressure tactics by everyone. The Israeli pressure tactics, the Hamas pressure tactics, and similarly the United States. Now, what is the pressure tactics and why? The Israeli pressure tactics is very clear. The last bastion of the Hamas is Rafah, and therefore the entire cadres of Hamas are concentrated here. They are overground, they are in the built-up areas, and they are underground in the tunnels. So this is their last stronghold. Number two, the biggest concern for the Israelis is, of course, the civilian casualties. And why? Because if large number of civilian casualties are there, the world will perceive it as a victory for Hamas. And therefore, that becomes a strong point for the Hamas. Larger number of civilian casualties is in the interest of Hamas. It gives them a win, and larger number of civilian casualties would also be a defeat, or the international community will go against Israel. So Israel has got another concern. The concern is to get back the hostages, and as on date, no one is aware how many hostages are alive, how many are dead. And I'm quite surprised that at this stage of war, Hamas is not even talking about returning the dead casualties in military warfare or any kind of warfare. At least basically, the dead are always released. For the dead, there are no negotiations. So this is where the Hamas stands to lose out. Now, what are the core concerns of Hamas? Obviously, they know this is the last bastion and they have to fight it out. Now, do they have the potential to fight it out? I would say yes. Why? Firstly, they are quite there in large numbers. The fact that they had, killed about 4 Israeli soldiers recently on one of the crossings by launching mortars and the fires. So this shows that they have the potential. They are in the good strength. And number 2, their biggest strength is the hostages. And besides this, the biggest strength is the number of civilian people, about 1 million Palestinian people who are in the Rafah area. Another advantage the Hamas has we must admit today that Hamas has definitely got underground tunnels leading on to Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood is there, even as the uh, Egyptian army can claim that there are no tunnels. I, as a military man, am quite convinced the tunnels are there, which are existing even below the surface of Egypt. And let us not be surprised, most of the cadres, Hamas cadres, are operating from here, and including most of the hostages who are alive would be kept here. Now, what is the US pressure tactics? Rightfully so, it's an election year. The anti-Semitism is going on in the United States and in the West. So these are their concerns, and President Biden was yesterday very clear in his speech that he supports the Jewish, the support for the Jews will always be there, and but he will not accept, communal remarks in the country and so forth. We are aware what happened. So this stage, and yes, US has now launched another pressure tactics by saying that the GB bombs will not be made available. The shipment has been halted. So this stage, what I have just given this analysis is a pressure tactics by all. Now, how it will unfold? I personally feel that the talks which are going on in Cairo, I think there is a lot of pressure now on Hamas, and also the pressure would be by the United States and also Israel. The fact that they have occupied the southern crossing, the fact that military forces now are
just
ready
yesterday said that it has accepted this proposal. It is Israel which is saying that it far from meets its demands. So I think the pressure on Israel is greater right now.
When proposal is there, it has to suit the interest of the both sides. It is not suiting the interest of the Israeli side. Why? Because it is only negotiation of the hostages. But finally, what is happening about the Hamas, a terrorist organization? What is happening about that? Therefore, they want a permanent ceasefire. Israel is not ready for a permanent ceasefire because once the hostage exchange is over, they definitely will go and attempt to eliminate Hamas. Now, coming on to eliminate Hamas.
So very quickly, because I'm really out of time and I also need to go across to Ambassador Gupta. Very quickly, sir.
Eliminating about Hamas. Ideology, I agree, yes, it's an ideology. Let's remember, in our own subcontinent, LTTE was finished off by the Sri Lankan army. It took 26 years. Let us remember Al-Qaeda, a very branded organization, was finished off in Afghanistan. The last of them was Al-Zawahiri. So it is easy to finish off these people. Top cadres have to be eliminated. Large number of cadres have to be eliminated. And therefore, Hamas will be, I would not say eliminated, but they definitely will be targeted by the Israeli because that is their stated objective. If they don't aim,
so this means, according to you, in your assessment, the Rafah offensive will go ahead. Let me now take this to Ambassador Yogesh Gupta. Ambassador Gupta, the US administration official who's been quoted in these reports in the Western media said that the shipment that was stopped last week is not linked to last month's $17 billion military aid package that has been announced by the US for Israel. The weapons being held back currently are related to a future delivery. But the message from Washington is clear that it is increasingly uncomfortable and concerned over Israel's campaign in Gaza. The question on everyone's mind is Netanyahu going to give in to US pressure? Because he always says we're only going to be guided by our interests, not by any external pressure.
No, my answer is that no. I think Netanyahu is not bothered very much by what President Biden is saying because of several reasons. One is that he knows that most likely Biden is going to lose the election. So he's going to be dealing with a new president who is much more favorably disposed to Israel. So frankly, Biden doesn't count very much for now. And also the way Biden has handled this whole issue, this whole crisis from the beginning, I think his utility to Israel has certainly weakened by now. And Netanyahu seems to be determined to pursue his objective of almost finishing, or eliminating the Hamas as much as possible. Now, I can't say that 100% of Hamas will be eliminated, but I think Netanyahu is very keen that Hamas must be dealt a severe blow so that Israel is able to re-establish its deterrence in the whole region. and that other countries like Iran should think twice before supporting the Hamas or before supporting others, its proxies in their efforts to take on Israel. And so it wants to establish that deterrence again. And also, I think in general, I think Netanyahu thinks that if he's able to eliminate the Hamas, then politically it helps him at home also. So from his perspective, I think a further operation against the Hamas will
continue in Rafah. So you don't believe that he is going to be held back by any kind of pressure? Eliminating Hamas, the one really wonders if that's even a realistic goal to begin with, is going to help him or could possibly help him with his political survival. Though if you ask people in Israel, they will tell you, regardless of the outcome of this war, Netanyahu will be sent home whenever Israel votes next. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, as we wrap up this discussion, ma'am, I'll give you the last word. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta just said something very interesting. He says Netanyahu is beyond caring about what Biden has to say, also because he believes that Biden is all set to lose this election to Donald Trump. Is that how you see it as well? And do you believe that given how there is growing anger over Biden's support to Israel's war in Gaza, both at home and around the globe, that Biden could in fact end up paying dearly for his Israel policy in the November election?
I think it's very important to remember that both parties in the United States are heavily influenced by what is called the American Jewish lobby. So whether Biden wins or loses to Trump, the point is that the Americans have had a pro-Israel policy which will continue. The issue here is that at what cost does Netanyahu want to eliminate Hamas to a certain extent? Because as I said earlier, you cannot eliminate Hamas completely until you eliminate the reasons for which Hamas exists. It's a completely different situation from what was cited regarding Sri Lanka, etc. So in that case, will the American public stomach the wholesale slaughter of Palestinian civilians, women and children now in the last phase of the operation, because these people now have nowhere else to go. It's the last part of the enclave. I would say that the public opinion in the United States will definitely turn against, they've already turned against the Israeli government, the present Israeli government. But I agree with my colleagues on the panel, including Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, who said that this will not deter Netanyahu at all, because he is completely under the control of extreme right-wingers in his war cabinet, and they are anti-American and they want to go after Hamas regardless of civilian slaughter. So they don't also seem to care of the consequences, long-term consequences of this slaughter. So I have a very pessimistic view of what's going to happen over the next few days in there. I think we are going to see a quick worsening of the situation and a lot of casualties which are going to be played out on TV screens, and which will merely increase the political difficulties of Netanyahu on one hand and the political difficulties of Biden on the other.
All right. So Netanyahu and his far-right ministers simply do not care about what the international community thinks. And this paints a very grim and worrying picture, ma'am, because more than 1 million Palestinians are currently sheltering in Rafah. What happens when a full-fledged ground operation is launched by Israel in Rafah? That is the biggest worry for the entire world. But on that note, I would like to thank Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, Major General Sanjay Meston, Ambassador Yogesh Gupta and Lev Aaron. Thanks to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to the big story that has been making headlines in the United States. For years, Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump have been locked in a public battle over an alleged sexual encounter, a hush money deal paid by for the former president's fixer, and their respective efforts to own the very public narrative. Those tensions and the salacious details that surround them spilled out in court on Tuesday when Daniels took the stand in Trump's criminal trial to face him in court for the first time. The former adult film star did not look at the former president for most of the day, except when she was asked to point him out. She spent much of her time on the stand recounting the sexual encounter that she claims to have had with Trump, an act that sparked the allegations at the heart of the case, and pushing back at his legal team's scathing questions. Trump, meanwhile, spent parts of her evidence cursing and shaking his head. That prompted a warning from the judge. The former president faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. The charges stem from an alleged attempt to conceal a $130,000 payment to Daniels, aimed to keep her quiet about the purported tryst. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denies any sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels, though he has acknowledged that his former lawyer Michael Cohen paid her a certain sum to keep her quiet about her claims. Stormy Daniels' testimony brought the most dramatic day of the trial. Till date, she provided lurid details about her encounter with Trump that the former president's lawyers have actually called for a mistrial. The judge acknowledged that there were some things that would have been better left unsaid and warned prosecutors not to ask for specifics of such a personal nature. The details which she previously shared included her claim that they did not use contraceptives, that she spanked Trump with a magazine, and the answers she allegedly elicited from the former president about his wife. The trial has already dredged up an underworld of tabloid publishers and Hollywood lawyers, one of whom was deployed by Daniels to broker the hush payment. Her testimony on Tuesday appeared to be a step too far for the judge as well as Trump's defense team. However, early in the day, Trump's lawyers sought to have the judge limit what prosecutors could ask Daniels about their alleged sexual encounter in 2016 and the pair's two subsequent meetings. The prosecution argued that they needed to ask Daniels about it to establish the intent for the payout. Despite tighter parameters, Daniels' scandalous details still spilled out in unusually long answers. This is not the first time Daniels has shared the details of her alleged sexual encounter with Trump. Since the deal came to light, she in fact told her story on national television in a self-titled documentary to America's most famous broadcast journalist and in her book Full Disclosure. But this was the first time that Stormy Daniels shared this story while the man she claims to have had a sexual encounter with sat just a few feet away. Amongst other things, Daniels told the court that she initially did not want to have dinner with Trump, but her publicist encouraged her, saying, "What could possibly go wrong?" That line drew laughs from many in the courtroom.
A very revealing day. As you see, their case is totally falling apart. They have nothing on books and records, and even something that should bear very little relationship to the case. It's just a disaster for the DA, for the Soros-backed DA. It's a disaster. This whole case is just a disaster. If you read the legal scholars, you'll see, because they're writing about it, they've never seen anything quite like it. And neither have I. I should be out campaigning right now. We're leading in all the polls. I'd like to be campaigning. We'll be leading by a lot more. But I just want to appreciate the job you're doing. It's not easy standing there all day waiting.
Our next story is also from the US. TikTok is suing the United States government in an effort to stop enforcement of a bill passed last month that seeks to force the app's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to sell the app or have it banned in the country. The company argues that invoking national security concerns is not a sufficient reason for restricting free speech. The lawsuit filed in the US Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit argues that this particular bill violates constitutional protections of free speech. The suit calls the law an unprecedented violation of the First Amendment.
TikTok and Chinese parent company ByteDance are suing the US government to block a law that could see the app banned in the country. The companies filed their lawsuit in a Washington, D.C. federal court on Tuesday, arguing that the legislation violates the US Constitution on free speech protections, among other grounds. The law, signed by President Joe Biden on April 24th, gives ByteDance until January 19th to sell TikTok or see the app banned in the US. In the lawsuit, the companies complained that the government's singling out of the platform is unprecedented. They say there was no question that the move will, quote, force a shutdown of TikTok by January 19, 2025, silencing the 170 million Americans who use the platform to communicate in ways that cannot be replicated elsewhere. The administration has said its aim is not to ban the app, but to see Chinese-based ownership ended on national security grounds. The White House and Justice Department declined to comment on the lawsuit. In the court filing, the company said the sale is simply not possible, not commercially, not technologically, not legally. They said moving the TikTok source code to the US would take years for an entirely new set of engineers to gain sufficient familiarity, adding that the Chinese government has made clear that it would not permit a divestment of the recommendation engine that is a key to the success of TikTok in the United States. The companies are asking the court to block U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland from enforcing the law. According to the document, only 21% of ByteDance is owned by the company's Chinese founder. 58% is owned by global institutional investors such as BlackRock, and 21% is owned by employees, including about 7,000 Americans.
Sounding an alarm about what the world could look like in the future, top scientists across the globe have predicted that global temperatures would rise by at least 2.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. This rise is much above the internationally agreed target to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial levels and would cause catastrophic consequences for humanity and the planet. The report has been published by scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. 80% of the scientists at the IPCC foresee at least 2.5 Celsius rise in global heating above the pre-industrial levels, while almost half of them anticipate this rise to be even higher at 3 degrees Celsius. Only 6% of these scientists have predicted that the internationally agreed limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise will actually be met. Several of the scientists said they have been left feeling hopeless, infuriated and scared by the failure of governments all over the world to act on the matter despite the clear scientific evidence. Scientists have painted a grave picture of what they describe as a semi-dystopian future, with famines, conflicts and mass migration driven by heat waves, wildfires, floods and storms becoming commonplace. Experts have said massive preparations to protect people from the worst of the coming climate disasters are now critical. But as per a survey, just a few IPCC experts are hopeful that governments and people across the world will actually deliver on what is needed to reduce the intensity. Younger scientists were more pessimistic, in fact, about the climate situation which could arise in the future. 52% of the respondents who are under the age of 50 said they are expecting a rise of at least 3 degrees Celsius, while a lesser 38% of the respondents above 50 thought the same. 49% of the female scientists surveyed thought the global temperature rise would be by about 3 degrees Celsius, while the number of male scientists thinking the same was at 38%. The main reason for failing to tackle the climate crisis, as cited by almost 75% of the scientists, was the lack of political will. 60% of the respondents also blamed the vested corporate interests such as the fossil fuel industry. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for watching. We're leaving you with some more stories that made global headlines today. May